Good evening. Tonight I invite you to leave behind the noise of the day and travel to a quiet place where the ocean never rushes, the wind carries forgotten memories, and every midnight brings a whisper that only a few people have ever heard. There is no need to solve every mystery tonight. There is no danger waiting for you. Only an old lighthouse, a lonely island, and a story that moves as gently as the tide beneath the moon. So settle into a comfortable position. Take one slow breath in and another slow breath out. Let the world become quieter with every passing moment. Our story begins on a small island far from the busy cities of the eastern coast. The island was so small that many maps forgot to draw it. Only sailors, fishermen, and a handful of historians still remembered its name, Blackwater Isle. The island had only 23 houses, a weathered church, a tiny harbor where wooden boats rested like sleeping birds, and standing on the highest cliff, an ancient lighthouse that had watched over the sea for nearly 200 years. The lighthouse had survived storms, wars, endless winters, and countless lonely nights beneath silent stars. Its white paint had faded into soft shades of gray. Its stone walls carried tiny cracks that looked almost like wrinkles on an old face. Yet every evening, just before sunset, its warm golden light slowly awakened. The people of Blackwater Isle believed the lighthouse had a soul. No one argued about that anymore. Some believed it remembered every ship that had ever crossed the sea. Others believed it quietly protected lost travelers. But every family agreed on one strange tradition. No one climbed to the top of the lighthouse after midnight, not because they feared ghosts, not because anyone had disappeared, simply because, at midnight, the lighthouse whispered, not loudly, not clearly, only softly, like the wind speaking through old stone. Most people ignored it. Some claimed it was only the ocean. Others smiled politely whenever visitors asked about the stories. But every child on the island eventually heard the same warning from their grandparents. If you ever hear the whisper, don't answer. For over 70 years, nobody had. Chapter 1. The New Keeper. On a quiet autumn morning, a young historian named Elias Carter stepped onto the wooden dock carrying one small suitcase, a leather notebook, and far too many questions. Elias was not searching for treasure, nor fame. He simply loved forgotten places. Old buildings fascinated him. He believed every wall, every stone, and every wooden floor remembered the people who had once touched them. When he received a letter asking if he would temporarily care for the old lighthouse while its elderly keeper recovered from illness, he accepted immediately. The ferry captain smiled as the island slowly appeared through the morning mist. "First time?" he asked. Elias nodded. "It won't be your last," the captain replied. "The island has a way of asking people to stay." Elias laughed softly. At the time, he thought it was only a friendly joke. He had no idea how true those words would become. The ferry drifted quietly toward the harbor. The morning sea was as smooth as polished glass, reflecting pale clouds that seemed to float both above and below the boat. Elias rested his hands on the wooden railing. The salty breeze carried the gentle scent of seaweed, pine trees, and something older, something he could not quite name. Perhaps every island had its own unique fragrance, or perhaps memories had a scent too. As the boat reached the dock, several fishermen waved politely. No one seemed surprised by the arrival of a stranger. Visitors were rare, but not impossible. A small bell rang somewhere near the harbor. Its soft sound rolled across the water before fading into silence. The captain lifted Elias's suitcase onto the dock. "Remember," he said with a friendly smile, "on Blackwater Isle, mornings belong to the sea." "And the nights?" Elias asked. The captain looked toward the distant lighthouse standing high upon the cliffs. "The nights belong to whatever chooses to whisper." He tipped his cap and returned to the ferry. Within minutes, the boat disappeared into the morning mist, leaving Elias completely alone. The island was peaceful, far quieter than any city he had ever visited. There were no busy streets, no loud engines, only the rhythmic crash of distant waves, the occasional cry of seabirds, and the soft rustling of tall grass dancing in the wind. A narrow stone path climbed gently toward the center of the island. Small cottages stood along the road. Most had flower gardens filled with lavender, white roses, and blue hydrangeas. An elderly woman watered her garden with a silver watering can. She smiled warmly. "You must be the new lighthouse keeper." "Only for a little while," Elias answered. She nodded. "Sometimes a little while becomes much longer." Before Elias could ask what she meant, she quietly returned to tending her flowers. Near the village square stood the smallest library Elias had ever seen. Its wooden sign gently swayed above the entrance. Inside, thousands of books rested neatly upon old shelves. The room smelled of paper, oak wood, and time itself. Behind the desk sat an elderly librarian with bright blue eyes. Without looking up, he spoke. "Elias Carter." Elias blinked. "You know my name?" "I've been expecting you." The librarian finally smiled. "The lighthouse always knows before we do." Elias chuckled politely. "I've already heard everyone talking about the lighthouse." "They don't talk," the librarian whispered. "They remember." He reached beneath the counter and produced an old brass key. Its surface was worn smooth by generations of careful hands. "This opens every door inside the lighthouse." Elias accepted it carefully. It felt surprisingly warm, as though someone had been holding it only moments before. The climb toward the lighthouse took nearly 20 minutes. The path wound through rolling green hills covered with wildflowers. White butterflies drifted lazily through the afternoon sunlight. Far below, gentle waves kissed the rocky shoreline. Everything felt peaceful, almost dreamlike. When Elias finally reached the summit, he stopped walking. The lighthouse stood even taller than he had imagined. Its ancient stones glowed softly beneath the afternoon sun. Thousands of tiny seashells had become embedded within the old mortar over the centuries. The enormous wooden door creaked gently as he unlocked it. Inside, cool air greeted him. A spiral staircase curved endlessly upward. Each stone step had been worn smooth by countless footsteps. Somewhere above, a grandfather clock quietly ticked. Tick, tick, tick. Its slow rhythm echoed through the empty tower like a heartbeat. Elias smiled. "This," he whispered to himself, "is exactly the kind of place I've been searching for." He had no way of knowing that before another midnight arrived, the lighthouse would whisper his name. Chapter 2. The first evening. By late afternoon, the island had settled into a peaceful silence. The fishermen had returned with their boats. Children's laughter slowly disappeared into nearby homes. Thin trails of smoke rose from stone chimneys, carrying the comforting scent of burning oak and freshly baked bread. From the windows of the lighthouse, Elias watched the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. The ocean transformed with every passing minute. Blue became silver, silver became gold. And finally, the sea glowed with soft shades of orange and deep crimson. It was the kind of sunset that asked nothing of anyone. It simply existed, calm, patient, beautiful. Elias opened his leather notebook. On the first page he wrote, Day 1. The island feels unusually peaceful. Every person I have met speaks kindly, yet every conversation somehow returns to the lighthouse. It is almost as if the building itself is another resident of Blackwater Isle. He paused, then added one more sentence. No one laughs when they mention the whispers. He closed the notebook. Outside, the wind gently brushed against the lighthouse windows. Not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind him that the sea was always awake. The inside of the lighthouse was simple: a small kitchen, a wooden dining table polished by many years of use, a bookshelf filled with journals dating back nearly a century, an old rocking chair beside the fireplace, and hundreds, perhaps thousands, of tiny notes left behind by former keepers. Some contained weather reports, some described passing ships, others simply recorded quiet observations. The sea was calm today. A family of seals rested below the eastern cliff. The stars were especially bright tonight. The entries felt peaceful, almost comforting, until Elias discovered one journal wrapped in faded blue cloth. Unlike the others, it had no name on the cover, only one sentence. Do not answer the whisper. He stared at the words for a long moment. The handwriting was careful, steady, as though the writer had wanted future readers to understand every letter perfectly. Elias opened the journal. The first pages described ordinary days: changing weather, passing ships, repairs around the lighthouse. But gradually, the writing became different, more thoughtful, more mysterious. One entry caught his attention immediately. The whisper never sounds the same twice. Some hear a stranger, some hear an old friend. I heard my own father, though he had been gone for 20 years. Whatever speaks, it knows us. Elias slowly closed the journal. A cold breeze drifted through the room, yet every window remained closed. He looked around. Nothing had changed. The clock continued ticking. The fire crackled softly. The sea rolled endlessly below. Everything appeared perfectly normal, and still. The room somehow felt different, as if someone else had quietly entered without making a sound. Night arrived gently. One by one, stars appeared above the island. The moon rose slowly from the eastern horizon, casting a silver path across the calm ocean. Elias climbed the spiral staircase to light the great lantern. It was a tradition he intended to keep. Even though modern ships relied mostly on satellites, the lighthouse still shone every night. Its golden beams swept across the sea, round and round, patiently, faithfully, exactly as it had done for generations. Standing beside the great glass lens, Elias looked toward the sleeping village below. Tiny lights glowed from cottage windows. Everything seemed peaceful, safe, the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever happened. Then, far below, a single figure appeared on the cliff path, an old man. He carried no lantern. He walked slowly toward the lighthouse. When he reached the door, he looked up. Not frightened, not surprised. He simply raised one hand in greeting. Then he turned around and walked back into the darkness, without knocking, without speaking, as if he had only wanted to make sure. Someone was inside. Elias watched until the figure disappeared completely. He wondered who the man was. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ask someone in the village. Tonight. There was still plenty of time before midnight. and although he would never admit it aloud, he found himself listening, waiting, for the whisper everyone seemed to know about. The lighthouse that whispered only at midnight. Chapter 3. When the clock struck 12, the lighthouse had grown wonderfully quiet. The fire in the stone fireplace had softened into glowing embers. Its warm orange light danced gently across the old wooden floor. Outside, the ocean breathed in slow, endless rhythms, wave after wave, never hurried, never still. Elias poured himself a small cup of warm chamomile tea. He carried it to the window overlooking the sea. Above him, thousands of stars filled the sky. There were more stars than he had ever seen from the city. Some shimmered brightly. Others seemed so faint that they appeared only when he stopped trying to look directly at them. He smiled. Perhaps this was why people stayed here. Not because of the mystery, but because silence had become so rare everywhere else. The old grandfather clock stood at the center of the lighthouse. Its brass pendulum swung gently. Tick, tick, tick. The sound blended perfectly with the waves below. Elias glanced toward the clock. 11:42. Still some time before midnight. He opened another journal. This one belonged to a keeper named Thomas Reed. Its pages were neat and carefully dated. Most entries described ordinary work: cleaning the great lens, painting windows, watching storms roll across the sea. Then one sentence caught his attention. The whisper is never frightening. It is familiar. That is what makes it difficult to ignore. Elias slowly reread the words. Not frightening, familiar. He wondered what that could possibly mean. Outside, a light fog began drifting across the water. It arrived almost silently, like a blanket floating over the sea. The beam from the lighthouse stretched across it in wide circles. Every sweep briefly illuminated the mist before darkness returned. The island became smaller. The world beyond seemed to disappear completely. Only the lighthouse remained, standing alone above the ocean, watching, waiting. The clock continued its steady rhythm. 11:58. The wind faded. Even the waves seemed quieter. Elias noticed something unusual. The seabirds had stopped calling. Not one cry echoed through the night. The silence wasn't empty. It felt expectant, as though nature itself had paused for a moment. He set down his empty cup without realizing it. He had begun listening. 11:59. The lighthouse lantern completed another slow rotation. Its golden light swept across the sleeping sea. Then, the grandfather clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3. Its deep, gentle notes filled every corner of the tower, until finally, 12. Silence. Complete. Perfect. For just a few heartbeats. Nothing happened. Elias almost laughed. Perhaps every story on the island had simply grown larger over time. Perhaps the whisper was only the wind after all. Then, very softly, from somewhere above or below, or perhaps from inside the ancient stone walls themselves, a voice, so quiet that it almost blended with the sea. Elias. He froze. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't cold. It wasn't threatening. It sounded kind, like someone who had known him for many years. Then again, even softer. Elias. He slowly stood. Every instinct told him to remain where he was. Yet curiosity gently pulled him toward the spiral staircase. One careful step, then another. The lighthouse remained still. The whisper did not repeat. Only the clock resumed its patient ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Elias placed one hand against the cool stone wall. It felt ordinary, solid, ancient, and yet, for the briefest moment, he thought he felt another hand on the other side, not pushing, not knocking, simply resting there, waiting. He closed his eyes. The feeling vanished. When he opened them again, the lighthouse was exactly as it had always been, quiet, peaceful, unmoving. But Elias knew one thing with complete certainty. The whisper had been real, and it had spoken. His name, far out at sea. Beyond the reach of the lighthouse's golden beam, a tiny light appeared, not the light of a ship, not a star. It floated just above the surface of the water, perfectly still, watching the island, watching the lighthouse, watching Elias. And then, without a sound, the light disappeared. Chapter 4. The Morning After the Whisper. Morning arrived quietly. Long before the sun appeared above the horizon, the sky slowly changed from deep navy to soft shades of blue and silver. The first seabirds returned. Their gentle calls drifted through the cool air. The waves rolled against the cliffs with the same calm rhythm they had kept for centuries. If someone had visited the island that morning, they would never have guessed that anything unusual had happened during the night. Yet Elias woke earlier than usual, not because of fear, but because the whisper still lingered in his thoughts. He sat beside the small kitchen window, holding a warm mug of tea. Steam curled gently into the cool morning air. He replayed the moment again and again. The voice had spoken only one word, his name. Nothing more, no warning, no question, no request. Just Elias. Somehow that made it even more mysterious. After breakfast, he stepped outside. The fresh ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. The lighthouse stood quietly behind him, its white stone glowing in the early sunlight. Below, a narrow path led toward the village. As he walked, he noticed tiny wildflowers growing between the stones. Blue, white, yellow. They swayed gently as if greeting the morning. The island felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. When Elias reached the harbor, several fishermen were repairing their nets. One of them looked up and smiled. "Good morning, keeper." "Good morning." "How was your first night?" Elias hesitated. Then he smiled politely. "Very quiet." The fishermen exchanged brief glances. No one laughed. No one asked another question. Instead, they simply nodded, almost as though they already knew the rest of the answer. Later that morning, Elias returned to the small library. The elderly librarian was placing several books onto a shelf. Without turning around, he said, "You heard it." It wasn't a question. Elias slowly nodded. "Yes." The old man remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he turned. "What did it say?" "My name." The librarian closed his eyes. "Only your name." "Only my name." The old man smiled very gently. "Then the lighthouse is introducing itself." Elias frowned. "Lighthouses don't introduce themselves." "No," the librarian replied. "They usually don't." He carefully removed an old map from a drawer. The paper had become yellow with age. Its edges were worn and delicate. "This island has changed many times," he said, "but the lighthouse has never moved." He pointed toward the cliff. "Long before the village existed, people came here because they believed the cliff remembered every traveler who crossed the sea." "Remembered?" "Yes. The sea forgets. The wind forgets, but stone remembers." Elias looked at the ancient map. Near the lighthouse, someone had drawn a tiny silver circle. There was no label, only a handwritten note beneath it, the listening place. "What does that mean?" Elias asked. The librarian folded the map. "No one knows anymore." That afternoon, the island settled once again into its familiar rhythm. Children played quietly near the shore. Fishing boats drifted across calm waters. Clouds moved lazily overhead. Everything felt perfectly ordinary. And yet, every now and then, without thinking, Elias would glance toward the lighthouse, as though expecting it to be watching him. Not in a frightening way, but patiently, like an old friend waiting until someone was ready to ask the right question. As evening approached, a gentle fog began to gather over the sea once again. The villagers lit small lanterns outside their homes. One by one, warm lights appeared across Blackwater Isle. Elias climbed the spiral staircase to prepare the great beacon for another night. He paused beside the enormous glass lens. Far beyond the cliffs, the ocean stretched endlessly into the fading light, peaceful, silent, beautiful. Then, very far away, almost hidden by the evening mist, he saw the tiny light again, floating above the water, perfectly still, waiting, exactly where it had appeared the night before. This time, it remained there, long enough for him to wonder whether it was waiting for midnight. Chapter 5. The Light Beyond the Mist. The evening settled gently over Blackwater Isle. The last shades of gold faded from the horizon, replaced by soft blues and quiet silver moonlight. A cool breeze drifted across the cliffs, carrying the familiar scent of salt water and pine. Elias climbed the final steps to the lantern room. The great glass lens surrounded him like a crystal crown. With practiced care, he checked the light, polished the brass fittings, and watched as the steady golden beam began its endless journey across the sea. Round and round, patiently, faithfully. The lighthouse had done this every night for nearly 2 centuries. It never seemed to grow tired. Neither did the sea. Far beyond the reach of the cliffs, the small light still hovered above the water. It did not sway like a lantern. It did not flash like a ship's signal. It simply glowed, softly, calmly, almost as if it were breathing. Elias reached for an old brass telescope that rested beside the window. He adjusted the focus carefully. The distant light became clearer. Yet, it revealed almost nothing. There was no boat beneath it, no person holding it, no movement at all. Only a pale, warm glow suspended above the dark water. As he watched, the lighthouse beam swept across the ocean. For just a moment, its golden light touched the mysterious glow. And in that single heartbeat, the distant light faded away. Not quickly, not suddenly. It simply dissolved into the night as though it had never been there. Elias lowered the telescope. The sea looked empty once again. Later that evening, he returned to the library of journals. He lit a small oil lamp and searched through the shelves until he found one of the oldest books. Its cover was cracked with age. The pages felt delicate beneath his fingertips. On the first page was a date, October 14th, 1848. The handwriting was elegant and steady. Tonight I saw the waiting light again. Elias leaned closer. It appears only on calm nights. It never approaches the island. It never leaves. It simply waits beyond the reach of the lighthouse. Some believe it belongs to a ship that never returned. Others believe it is only a reflection upon the sea. I have watched it for 23 years. It has not changed once. Elias slowly turned the page. The next entry was much shorter. Whatever you do, do not follow the light. If it wishes to be found, it already knows the way home. He closed the journal gently. The words did not frighten him. Instead, they filled him with a quiet curiosity. Outside, the night deepened. Clouds drifted lazily across the moon, covering it for only a few moments before moving on. The lighthouse continued its slow, comforting rhythm. Inside the tower, the old grandfather clock ticked steadily. Tick, tick, tick. Its sound had become strangely comforting, almost like the heartbeat of the lighthouse itself. Elias found himself breathing in time with it, slowly, calmly, peacefully. As midnight drew closer, the island seemed to exhale. The wind softened, the waves quieted. Even the trees stood almost perfectly still. Elias stood beside the lantern room window. He wasn't waiting because he expected answers. He was waiting because some mysteries seemed to reveal themselves only to those who were patient enough to simply listen. The clock's hands crept toward 12. He smiled softly. Whatever happened tonight, he would not chase it. He would simply observe, just as the lighthouse had done, night after night, year after year, for generations, and somewhere beyond the gentle veil of mist. Something unseen seemed to be waiting as well, not with urgency, not with fear, but with the same quiet patience as the sea itself.
Chapter 6. The Melody in the Wind. The hands of the old clock moved slowly toward midnight. Tick, tick, tick. Each second seemed softer than the last. Elias stood beside the lantern room window, watching the moonlight stretch across the calm sea like a silver ribbon. The mysterious light had not returned. Only the endless rhythm of the waves remained. It was enough. Sometimes, he thought, silence could be more interesting than answers. A gentle breeze slipped through a tiny crack in the stone wall. It carried a sound so faint that Elias almost mistook it for the wind. It was a melody, only a few quiet notes, slow, gentle, beautiful. It reminded him of an old lullaby, though he couldn't remember where he had first heard it. The tune drifted through the lighthouse for only a few moments. Then it disappeared, leaving behind nothing but stillness. Midnight arrived. The grandfather clock chimed 12 slow, steady notes. 1, 2, 3, until the 12th bell echoed softly through the tower. Elias waited. The whisper did not come immediately. Instead, the lighthouse remained perfectly quiet, so quiet that he could hear the soft crackle of the lantern flame above him. Then, very gently, a familiar voice spoke once more. Elias. He closed his eyes. He remembered the warning. Do not answer the whisper. So he remained silent. The voice came again. Not louder, only closer. Elias, there was kindness in it. No anger, no sadness, only patience. As if whoever, or whatever, was speaking understood that some conversations could wait. After a long pause, the whisper faded into the sound of the sea. Nothing else happened that night. No strange lights, no footsteps, no shadows. Only the peaceful breathing of the ocean beneath the stars. Elias returned downstairs and wrote in his notebook. The whisper returned. It spoke only my name. I did not answer. Oddly, I do not feel afraid. I feel as though the lighthouse is waiting for the right time to tell its story. He placed the notebook beside his bed. Outside, the lighthouse continued to shine across the sleeping sea. Its warm beam turned slowly, again and again, just as it always had. Before dawn, Elias dreamed. He was standing on the same cliff, but the lighthouse was new. Its white stones were bright and untouched by time. The paint was fresh. The windows sparkled. Around him, people dressed in clothes from another century walked quietly along the path. Some carried ropes, others carried lanterns. No one spoke, yet everyone smiled as they passed. At the top of the lighthouse steps stood an elderly keeper with silver hair. He looked directly at Elias. Then, without moving his lips, Elias somehow understood his words. Every lighthouse keeps two kinds of light. One guides ships, the other guides memories. The old keeper slowly raised one hand toward the sea. Beyond the horizon, a tiny golden light appeared, exactly like the one Elias had seen each evening. The keeper smiled. Then everything dissolved into soft white mist. Elias awoke just as the first rays of sunlight touched his window. The dream faded quickly, but one sentence remained perfectly clear in his mind. One light guides ships, the other guides memories. He wrote those words into his notebook before they could disappear. Outside, the sea shimmered peacefully beneath the morning sun. Another quiet day had begun on Blackwater Isle, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the mystery waited with endless patience. Chapter 7. The watchmaker's cottage morning arrived with a sky the color of soft pearl. The sea was calm once again, as though the night had folded itself away without leaving a trace. Elias stood outside the lighthouse, breathing in the cool ocean air. The dream still lingered in his thoughts. One light guides ships, the other guides memories. The words felt less like a dream and more like something he had been meant to remember. After a simple breakfast of fresh bread, warm butter, and a cup of tea, Elias decided to explore a part of the island he had not yet visited. An elderly fisherman had once mentioned a small cottage on the western side of Blackwater Isle. It belonged to a man who repaired old clocks. Every island needs someone who understands time, the fisherman had said with a quiet smile. The narrow path wound through fields of tall grass that swayed gently in the morning breeze. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides in soft shades of blue and white. Above, white gulls circled lazily beneath the clear sky. The walk felt peaceful. Every step seemed to slow his thoughts. There was no hurry here. Time itself seemed to move differently on the island. After nearly half an hour, Elias reached the cottage. It was small, built from weathered grey stone, with a roof covered in green moss. A wooden sign hung above the door. The paint had faded so much that only a few letters remained. Before Elias could knock, the door slowly opened. An old man stood inside. His silver hair was neatly combed. Round spectacles rested on the bridge of his nose. His gentle eyes sparkled with quiet kindness. "You must be the lighthouse keeper," he said. Elias smiled for a little while. The old man nodded. "So we all say." Inside the cottage, hundreds of clocks covered the walls. Large clocks, tiny clocks, wooden clocks, brass clocks. Pocket watches rested neatly inside glass cases. Some ticked loudly, others so softly that they could barely be heard. Yet somehow, every one of them remained perfectly in rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The room felt alive. Not busy, not noisy, simply alive. The old man poured 2 cups of warm tea. "My name is Samuel," he said. "I've repaired the island's clocks for nearly 50 years. Elias accepted the tea with gratitude. "I've never seen so many clocks in one place." Samuel smiled. "Most people think I repair clocks." He looked toward the window. "But really, I help people remember that time is a friend, not an enemy." For a while, they simply listened to the ticking. It was strangely comforting. Finally, Elias asked the question that had been on his mind since arriving on the island. "Have you ever heard the whisper?" Samuel's smile became thoughtful. "Oh, yes, many years ago." "What did it say?" The old watchmaker looked down at his teacup. "It didn't tell me anything." "It reminded me." "Of what?" Samuel's eyes drifted toward an old photograph sitting on the shelf. "A promise I had almost forgotten." He did not explain further, and somehow Elias felt no need to ask. Some memories belonged only to the people who carried them. Before Elias left, Samuel handed him a small pocket watch. Its silver case was smooth with age. "This belonged to my grandfather," Samuel said. "It stopped many years ago." Elias gently turned it over in his hands. The watch did not tick. The hands rested quietly at exactly 12 o'clock. "It doesn't work," Elias said softly. Samuel smiled. "Oh, it works. It simply keeps a different kind of time." Elias looked at him with quiet curiosity. "What does that mean?" The old watchmaker chuckled. "If the lighthouse decides you should know, it will tell you." As Elias stepped outside, the afternoon sun bathed the island in warm golden light. He slipped the pocket watch into his coat pocket. Though it remained silent, he could not shake the feeling that it was somehow waiting. Far above the western cliffs, the lighthouse stood against the endless blue sky. Its white stone walls gleamed softly in the sunlight, watching, as they always had. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, where the sea met the sky, a faint silver mist slowly began to gather. Though the sun still shone brightly, it looked almost as though the ocean was preparing for another whisper. Chapter 8. The Journal Without a Beginning. The afternoon faded slowly into evening. Long shadows stretched across the grassy hills of Blackwater Isle. The air smelled of wild lavender, salt, and the distant sea. Elias walked back toward the lighthouse at an unhurried pace. In his coat pocket, the old silver pocket watch rested quietly. Its hands still pointed to 12. It made no sound. And yet, for reasons he could not explain, he found himself checking it every few minutes, almost as though he expected it to begin ticking on its own. Back inside the lighthouse, everything was exactly as he had left it. The small kitchen was warm from the afternoon sun. The rocking chair sat beside the fireplace. The grandfather clock continued its gentle rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Elias climbed the spiral staircase to the room where the old journals were kept. The shelves held dozens of weathered books. Some were thin, some thick, some nearly falling apart with age. He ran his fingers along the worn leather bindings until one caught his attention. Unlike the others, this journal had no title, no year, no name. Just a smooth gray cover, faded by time. When he opened it, he noticed something unusual. The first page was missing, so was the second, and the third. The journal seemed to begin in the middle of a sentence, because the Lighthouse never chooses the first listener by accident. Elias blinked. It was an odd place to begin. As if the story had already been unfolding long before the writer picked up the pen. He turned the page. The handwriting was elegant and steady. Some believe the whisper is a voice. Others believe it is the sea. Neither is completely true. The whisper is memory itself, and memories have always searched for someone willing to carry them forward. Elias sat down slowly. The room felt especially quiet. Outside, the evening breeze brushed gently against the windows. He continued reading. The whisper asks for nothing. It gives no commands. It offers no rewards. It simply waits for patience, for kindness, for someone who listens before speaking. Those words stayed with him. They did not sound like instructions. They sounded like wisdom passed from one keeper to the next. He wondered who had written them, and why the beginning of the journal had disappeared. As dusk settled over the island, Elias lit a small oil lamp. Its soft golden glow filled the reading room. Tiny dust particles drifted lazily through the light. The lighthouse felt less like a building now, more like an old friend. Every staircase, every window, every stone seemed familiar, comforting. When he closed the journal, something slipped from between its pages. A folded piece of paper, yellow with age. Carefully, Elias unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a sketch, drawn in delicate pencil. It showed the lighthouse exactly as it stood today. The cliffs, the sea, the winding path, even the tiny harbor below. But there was one detail Elias had never seen before. Just offshore, a small island, barely larger than a single house, and on that island another tower, much shorter than the lighthouse, almost hidden by mist. Beneath the drawing, someone had written only 4 words. When remembered, it returns. Elias stared at the sketch. He had explored maps of Blackwater Isle. None of them showed another island nearby. Could it have disappeared? Had it never existed? Or did it appear only under certain conditions? He folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his notebook. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear. The sea shimmered beneath the rising moon. Another peaceful night was beginning. Another midnight slowly approached. And somewhere beyond the reach of the lighthouse's warm golden beam, something long forgotten seemed to be waiting, to be remembered. Chapter 9. The Island That Wasn't on the Map. The moon rose slowly above the eastern horizon. Its silver light rested gently upon the sea, turning every small wave into a ribbon of quiet light. From the lantern room, Elias unfolded the old sketch once more. He compared it with the view outside. The cliffs were the same. The harbor was the same. The curve of the shoreline matched perfectly. Only one thing was missing: the tiny island. He searched the ocean carefully. There was nothing there, only open water, stretching peacefully toward the horizon. He smiled to himself. Perhaps, he whispered, some places exist only in memory. The thought felt strangely comforting. The lighthouse lantern completed another slow circle. Its warm beams swept across the calm sea. Round and round and round again. Every rotation seemed to measure time in its own quiet way. Elias noticed that whenever the light passed over the water, the surface sparkled for just a heartbeat, as if countless tiny stars were sleeping beneath the waves. Downstairs, the grandfather clock continued its patient rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The sound no longer reminded Elias of passing time. Instead, it reminded him that some things remained faithful, no matter how many years passed. The clock had been here before he arrived. It would likely remain long after he had gone. That thought did not make him feel small. It made him feel peaceful. Just before 11 o'clock, someone knocked softly on the lighthouse door. 3 gentle knocks, not hurried, not loud. Elias opened the door. Standing outside was the elderly woman who tended the lavender garden near the village. She carried a small woven basket. "I thought you might like some fresh bread," she said with a warm smile. "And a little honey." The aroma drifted from the basket, sweet and comforting. Elias thanked her and invited her inside. For a few minutes, they sat near the fireplace. The flames danced quietly between them. Neither felt the need to speak very much. Sometimes silence was its own kind of conversation. Finally, Elias asked, "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "The sketch I found shows another small island nearby." Her gentle smile did not disappear. Instead, it became thoughtful. "My grandmother used to tell stories about it. So it was real? Perhaps. What happened to it?" She looked toward the window, where the moonlight shimmered on the sea. "She always said, the island never disappeared. It simply waited until someone remembered how to find it." Those words lingered in the room long after she had left. Waited until someone remembered. Not searched, not discovered. Remembered. There was something beautifully gentle about that idea. As if memory itself could become a bridge between yesterday and today. Later that night, the clock approached midnight once again. The lighthouse stood peacefully against the stars. The wind had become almost completely still. Far out across the ocean, a thin blanket of silver mist began to gather. It moved slowly, gracefully, without a sound. As the lighthouse beam swept across the sea, the mist shimmered. For the briefest moment, Elias thought he saw the outline of distant land, a tiny shape, barely visible, gone almost as soon as it appeared. He blinked. The ocean looked empty again, yet he found himself smiling. Not because he was certain of what he had seen, but because the mystery no longer felt like something to solve. It felt like something to experience, something to patiently discover. One quiet night at a time. Outside, the sea continued its endless song. Above, countless stars watched silently. And, somewhere beyond the silver mist, the forgotten island waited. not to be found, but to be remembered. Chapter 10, The Path Across the Water. The night deepened with remarkable gentleness. Clouds drifted slowly across the face of the moon, never hiding it for long. The sea remained calm. Not perfectly still, but calm enough that every ripple reflected the silver light above. Elias stood at the highest window of the lighthouse. He no longer searched the horizon with urgency. Instead, he allowed his eyes to wander naturally. The island had already taught him one important lesson. Some things revealed themselves only when they were no longer being chased. The lantern continued its graceful rotation. Its warm beam crossed the sea, again and again, like the slow breathing of a sleeping giant. Each sweep illuminated the mist for only a heartbeat. Then darkness returned, comfortable, gentle, never frightening. Inside the lighthouse, the old pocket watch rested quietly on the wooden table. Its hands still pointed to 12. Curious, Elias picked it up once more. The silver felt cool against his palm. He held it close to his ear. Nothing, no ticking, no movement, only silence. Then, as the grandfather clock downstairs began to announce midnight, the pocket watch gave a single, delicate sound. Tick! Only once. So soft that Elias almost believed he had imagined it. He looked down. The hands had moved. Not far. Just 1 minute. 12 became 12:01. Then they stopped again. At that exact moment, the whisper returned. Elias. The voice floated through the stone walls like a gentle breeze. It carried no fear, only warmth, only patience. He remembered every warning he had heard since arriving on Blackwater Isle. Do not answer. So once again, he remained silent. The whisper seemed almost pleased by his quietness. It faded slowly into the sound of the ocean. A few moments later, something extraordinary happened. Far beyond the lighthouse, the silver mist began to change. Instead of drifting aimlessly across the sea, it slowly gathered into a long, narrow line. At first, Elias thought it was only his imagination. But as the moonlight brightened, the line became clearer. It looked almost like a path, not made of stone, not made of wood. A pathway of glowing mist stretching across the water, beginning near the cliffs and disappearing into the distant darkness. Elias watched in complete silence. The pathway remained for only a few minutes. Then, just as quietly as it had appeared, it dissolved back into the sea. The next morning, Elias walked down to the harbor before sunrise. Old Captain Rowan was already preparing his fishing boat. His weathered hands moved slowly as he untangled a bundle of rope. "You're awake early," the captain said with a smile. "So are you," the captain chuckled. "The sea likes early company." For a while they simply watched the gentle waves. Then Elias asked, "Captain, have you ever seen a path across the water?" The old sailor didn't look surprised. Instead, he nodded almost immediately. "Only twice. Once when I was a little boy, and once after my father passed away." Elias waited. The captain tied one final knot before speaking again. "My father told me never to follow it." "Why?" "Because," he smiled toward the horizon, Some journeys aren't meant to carry your feet. They're meant to carry your heart. Those words stayed with Elias for the rest of the day. He wrote them carefully in his notebook, not because he wanted to remember them, but because they already felt unforgettable. That evening, as the sun slowly slipped beneath the horizon, he stood once again beside the great lantern. The sea shimmered below, the breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. And somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary maps, beyond memory, beyond time, something ancient waited with infinite patience, not calling, not demanding, simply waiting for the night when the path across the water would appear once more. Chapter 11. The Letter Hidden Inside the Wall. Morning arrived wrapped in a soft blanket of fog. The cliffs were almost invisible. Only the steady light of the lighthouse could be seen from the village below. Elias awoke before sunrise. For a few quiet moments he simply listened. The familiar ticking of the grandfather clock, the gentle sigh of the wind, the distant rhythm of waves meeting stone. The sounds had become part of his mornings, almost like old friends greeting him at the start of each day. After breakfast, Elias decided to clean one of the upper storage rooms. The elderly keeper would eventually return, and the lighthouse deserved to be in perfect condition. The room was filled with old rope, wooden crates, faded maps, and shelves covered in a fine layer of dust. Sunlight slipped through a small round window, illuminating tiny particles that floated lazily through the air. Everything smelled of cedar wood, sea salt, and thyme. As Elias moved an old bookshelf away from the stone wall, he noticed something unusual. One of the stones was slightly loose, not broken, simply different. Its edges were smoother than the others. Curious! He gently pressed against it. With a soft scrape, the stone shifted inward. Behind it was a narrow hollow in the wall. Inside rested a small wooden box. It was no larger than a hardcover book. The wood had darkened with age, but the brass clasp still shone faintly. Elias carefully lifted it out. A thin layer of dust drifted into the sunlight. The box felt surprisingly light. Inside, there was only one item, a single folded letter. The paper had yellowed over many decades. Its edges were delicate, but the ink remained remarkably clear. Across the front were 6 carefully written words. For the keeper who listens patiently. Elias paused. He had found many journals, many notes, but this felt different, almost personal. He unfolded the letter with great care. The handwriting was elegant and calm. If you are reading this, then the lighthouse has already spoken your name. Do not worry. Every keeper hears it differently. Some hear a parent, some hear a friend, some hear only silence. The lighthouse does not choose the perfect person. It chooses the patient one. Remember this, there are mysteries that become smaller when solved. And there are mysteries that become more beautiful when simply lived. Do not rush. The sea has waited hundreds of years. It can wait a little longer. There was no signature. Only a small drawing of a lighthouse beneath the final sentence. Elias folded the letter slowly. He slipped it back into its wooden box. For a long moment, he simply sat beside the window. Looking out across the endless ocean, the words stayed with him. The sea has waited hundreds of years. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson the island offered. Not every question demanded an immediate answer. Some answers arrived only after enough quiet mornings, enough peaceful evenings, enough patient listening. That afternoon, a gentle rain began to fall. Tiny droplets tapped softly against the lighthouse windows. The cliffs disappeared behind a curtain of mist. The rain was light, almost musical. Elias lit the fireplace and settled into the old rocking chair with another journal. Outside, the ocean seemed to breathe more deeply beneath the rain. Inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped the room in quiet comfort. He closed his eyes for just a moment. The rocking chair moved gently, back and forth, back and forth. Somewhere within the peaceful rhythm of the rain, he thought he heard it again. Not the whisper, not yet, but the faint melody that had drifted through the lighthouse several nights before. Only a few notes, soft, gentle, almost like a lullaby carried by the wind. When he opened his eyes, the melody had already faded. The lighthouse stood peacefully around him. The rain continued. The sea continued. Time continued. And somewhere beyond the mist, beyond memory, beyond the edge of every map, the hidden island waited, as patiently as ever. Chapter 12. The Bell That Rang by Itself. The rain continued through the night, not as a storm, not with thunder or fierce winds, just a gentle, steady rain that seemed to wash the island in silence. Tiny drops traced slow paths across the lighthouse windows. The ocean answered with its familiar rhythm, wave after wave, never rushing, never resting. Elias sat beside the fireplace with a blanket over his shoulders. The warmth of the fire mixed with the cool scent of rain drifting through the old stone tower. He opened his notebook and wrote only one sentence. The more I listen, the quieter my thoughts become. He smiled. When he had first arrived on Blackwater Isle, he had wanted answers. Now, he was beginning to enjoy the questions. As evening settled across the island, the rain finally stopped. Clouds slowly drifted apart. One by one, stars returned to the sky. The moon emerged from behind the last thin cloud, bathing the cliffs in soft silver light. Everything looked fresh. Every leaf sparkled with tiny drops of water. The world seemed to have been quietly polished while everyone slept. Just before midnight, Elias climbed to the lantern room. The great lens turned with its steady grace. Its warm light stretched across the sea. The mist had vanished. The horizon was perfectly clear. Far below, the village was asleep. Only a few windows still glowed with the soft light of oil lamps. The old grandfather clock downstairs continued its gentle rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. When the hands reached 12, the clock began its familiar chime. 1, 2, 3, until the 12th note slowly faded into silence. Elias waited. The whisper did not come. Instead, from somewhere outside, a single bell rang. Dong. It was soft, deep, lonely. The sound drifted across the water. Elias stepped closer to the window. There were no ships, no boats. Nothing moved upon the sea. A few moments passed. Then the bell rang again. Dawn. This time it seemed farther away, as if carried by the wind from somewhere beyond the horizon. The sound wasn't frightening. It felt ancient, like the echo of something that had been ringing for hundreds of years. The old journals had mentioned no bell. The villagers had never spoken of one. Yet somehow the sound felt familiar, as though the island itself recognized it. Even the seabirds remained perfectly still, listening. Elias closed his eyes. The bell rang once more. Dong. For a brief moment, he imagined another lighthouse somewhere far beyond the mist. Not abandoned, not forgotten, simply hidden. Its light shining across another quiet sea. Its keeper watching another peaceful night. Perhaps the world held more lighthouses than maps could ever show, and perhaps some of them existed only for those who believed they still did. When Elias opened his eyes again, the sound had faded. The sea was quiet. The lighthouse stood as it always had, warm, steady, faithful. He glanced toward the pocket watch resting on the windowsill. Without anyone touching it, the minute hand had moved once more. It now pointed to 12:02, only 1 minute farther than before. No ticking followed, just stillness, as if the watch awakened only when the island wished it to. Elias smiled softly. He no longer found such moments surprising. On Blackwater Isle, not everything needed an explanation. Some things simply belonged to the rhythm of the place, far beyond the reach of the lighthouse's golden beam. Just at the edge of moonlight, a tiny point of warm light appeared once again. It remained perfectly still, waiting, patient, as though it knew that every quiet night brought Elias one small step closer to remembering something he had never known he had forgotten. Chapter 13. The Garden of Quiet Names. The first light of dawn arrived without hurry. A gentle band of pale gold stretched across the eastern sky, while the stars slowly faded, one by one. The sea reflected the morning light like polished glass. Not a single wave seemed eager to disturb the silence. Elias stood outside the lighthouse with a warm cup of tea resting comfortably between his hands. He watched the sunrise without trying to capture it in words. Some mornings, he thought, were meant simply to be witnessed. After breakfast, he decided to take a different path through the island. Instead of walking toward the harbor, he followed a narrow trail that disappeared between rows of tall pine trees. The air beneath the branches felt cooler, the scent of pine needles mixed with damp earth and wild mint. Sunlight filtered gently through the leaves, creating moving patterns across the path. Birdsong echoed softly from somewhere high above. The forest did not feel mysterious. It felt welcoming, almost as if it had been expecting him. After a pleasant walk, the trees slowly opened into a small garden, surrounded by an old stone wall. The gate stood open. No sign marked the entrance. Inside, hundreds of white flowers bloomed peacefully. Lavender swayed in the morning breeze. Tiny bees drifted lazily from flower to flower. At the center of the garden stood a weathered stone fountain. Water flowed quietly from its center, creating the gentlest melody. An elderly woman sat on a wooden bench beside it. She looked up and smiled. I wondered when you would find this place. Elias returned the smile. I didn't know it was here. Few visitors do. She motioned toward the flowers. We call this the Garden of Quiet Names. Elias walked slowly among the flower beds. Near each cluster of flowers stood a small, smooth stone. On every stone, only a single name. No dates, no family names, no titles. Just one first name. Anna, Thomas, Grace, Samuel, Clara. Hundreds of names, all resting peacefully among the flowers. What is this place? Elias asked quietly. The old woman folded her hands in her lap. When someone who truly loved this island passes away, we plant flowers instead of building large monuments. And the names? They remind us that a name is enough. She smiled gently. When someone remembers your name with kindness, a part of you never really leaves. Elias wandered slowly through the peaceful garden. The fountain continued its quiet song. The breeze carried the fragrance of lavender through the warm morning air. Everything felt wonderfully still. Near the far corner of the garden, one stone caught his attention. Unlike the others, it had no name. Only a small carving of a lighthouse. Below it were 4 carefully carved words. The keeper is remembered. Nothing more. No explanation. No date. No signature. Elias reached out and gently brushed a fallen leaf from the top of the stone. For a brief moment, the warm sunlight touched the carving, and it almost seemed to glow. The old woman noticed his curiosity. Every keeper of the lighthouse eventually receives one. One what? A stone. Without a name? She nodded. Because the lighthouse remembers them all. Elias looked back toward the distant cliffs, where the lighthouse stood proudly against the blue sky. Somehow, the idea did not feel sad. It felt peaceful, like becoming part of a story that had been quietly unfolding for generations itself. Before leaving, the old woman handed him a single white flower. We grow these only here, she said. They bloom in every season. Elias accepted it carefully. What are they called? She smiled. We've never given them a name. He looked at the delicate petals. They're beautiful. Some beautiful things, she replied softly, don't need names to be remembered. That evening, Elias placed the white flower beside the silent pocket watch on the windowsill. The lighthouse glowed warmly as the sun disappeared beyond the western sea. The flower remained perfectly fresh. The watch remained perfectly still. Outside, the first stars began to appear. And somewhere beyond the quiet horizon, the unseen light waited once again, patiently, as if another small piece of the island's gentle mystery was ready to reveal itself. The Lighthouse That Whispered Only at Midnight. Chapter 15. The Keeper Who Finally Understood. Several peaceful days passed. The island remained unchanged. The waves continued their endless conversation with the cliffs. The lighthouse turned faithfully through every sunset and every sunrise. And each midnight the whisper came, always gentle, always patient. always speaking only one or two quiet words. Elias no longer counted the nights. He no longer searched the journals for hidden answers. Instead, he listened. He walked the cliffs each morning. He greeted the fishermen. He shared warm tea with Samuel, the old watchmaker. He visited the Garden of Quiet Names. Little by little, the mystery stopped feeling like a puzzle. It became part of the rhythm of the island itself. One calm evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Elias climbed to the lantern room for what he somehow knew would be a special night. The sky was perfectly clear. The sea reflected every star. When midnight arrived, the old clock chimed 12 gentle notes. The whisper returned one last time. Not loudly, not from the walls, not from the wind. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. It said, "Thank you for listening." A warm breeze filled the lantern room. The silent pocket watch resting on the windowsill gave one final tick, then another. Its hands began to move again, steadily, quietly, keeping ordinary time at last. Elias smiled. He finally understood. The lighthouse had never wanted someone to solve its mystery. It had only wanted someone willing to slow down long enough to hear the world breathe. Outside, far beyond the cliffs, the tiny waiting light slowly faded into the horizon. Not because it had disappeared, but because it was no longer waiting. Chapter 16. The Light That Never Goes Out. Autumn quietly became winter. Winter slowly welcomed spring. The seasons changed, as they always do. Eventually, the elderly lighthouse keeper recovered and returned to Blackwater Isle. Elias packed his notebook, the old journals he had copied, and the silver pocket watch, now ticking gently in his coat pocket. Before leaving, he climbed the lighthouse one final time. He stood beside the great lantern as dawn painted the ocean with soft shades of gold. He placed his hand upon the ancient stone wall. The lighthouse remained silent. There was no whisper. It didn't need one. Some friendships no longer require words. As the ferry carried him away from Blackwater Isle, Elias looked back. The lighthouse stood proudly upon its cliff. Its golden light shone across the endless sea, steady, warm, faithful. Years later, people would ask Elias why he smiled whenever someone mentioned lighthouses. He never spoke about whispers, or hidden islands, or mysterious lights beyond the mist. Instead, he would simply say, "There is a small island where time moves a little more gently, and if you ever find it, don't rush. Listen, because the greatest mysteries are not always meant to be solved. Some are meant to be experienced. Some are meant to comfort us, and some stay with us long after the story ends." So, as the waves continue their endless song, and the lighthouse keeps watch beneath the stars, may your thoughts grow lighter. May your heart grow quieter, and may peaceful dreams find you, like a warm light across a calm sea. Good night.